Hello, and you are very welcome to Kicking Match, a podcast all about the Irish League. My name is Peter Cinnamon, and on this maiden voyage of the pod, well, you don't need me to tell you that the NIFL Premiership is almost upon us once again. We're going to be looking at it all. We're going to be chatting who's going to win it, what team or teams likely won't be in it this time next summer, and just like a Cathedral Quarter pub crawl, we're going club by club. Trainers, very much welcome, and I recommend the burger if you get peckish when we go by Dungannon. So, saddle up as your Saturday afternoons, or Sunday afternoons if you're a Linfield fan this season, are about to get good once again. And it's just not myself filling these not so leather-bound podcasting chairs. My very first guest on the pod, well, he's one of the most recognisable voices in local sport. I can almost guarantee you that he's gone wild commentating one of your team's most iconic goals. It is fantastic to have you, Mr. Michael Clarke.
Thank you very much. It's an honour to be the first guest on this show and the first of many. Every success wish to you, sir, but thank you for having me.
First pick out of the hat, ding dong. First one out of the draft.
All the celebs were busy.
Well, you know, it's August again. It's the whole cliche of it's great to be back. I've missed football, all that type of stuff. In your world, Michael, have you actually missed football, or does it just feel like a massive blur?
I haven't had a chance to miss football. I've had international football at different levels, covering youth tournaments, including Super Cup and I, which was so much fun. It was bananas, in fairness, getting up to finals day, where I had 3 finals in one day, which meant I had 3 semi-finals to keep an eye on the night before, and then 6 clubs to phone and 120 players to learn about after 10 o'clock at night. But the beautiful game, we got there. So I haven't had a chance to miss football, but who would want it to stop? I love it.
Well, we all know it'll be your voice clipped up as we look back 10 years from now to whatever the random player was playing for United or Rangers. It all started there, and your voice will be attached to it. So the future starts now. But it's come back again. The league is here. The upcoming 22-23 season marks the 15th 12-team campaign. It doesn't feel like we reduced that long ago. Michael, there's a split in the middle. There's 33 games. Then you play a 5 at the end. It's not 100% perfect, but it's fair to say it's here to stay.
I think largely it's a way that works. It definitely gives you that excitement at the end of the season, having all the top teams having to play each other. I mean, the jeopardy involved there. You look at the last campaign where it went down to the final day and 1 point ultimately separating the teams. It's probably not a perfect system in terms of, like, I wouldn't like first and second to play each other at the start of the split. Let's try if we can. I know we can't be too manufactured, but they're able to manufacture it so that it definitely happens. I'd like it a wee bit more random so that there's the chance that they meet in the final day. But that's a slight gripe. But yeah, it's been a format that's worked so far.
Yeah, and it's been tweaked very slightly. We have the European playoff again, where 7th place has their chance to sneak up. Overall, that's worked as well. We've had plenty of drama there. Looking back to where we were when we reduced to 16, where we are now, and the big changes, the major ones probably are surrounding the fact that we now have 3 full-time teams, plus the one, quote-unquote, 2/3. That is a big change. That is one of the few things where you're like, this is how the league is moving forward.
And it's exciting because with that, it allows players to maybe stay in Northern Ireland longer because full-time is an option for them, or something close to full-time. For other players, they might choose to come to Northern Ireland, whereas they wouldn't have done previously. So there's that element to it. But even looking a wee bit outside of the 12-team bubble, there's the fact that it forces some previously Premiership quality players to maybe consider playing in the Championship. It brings the standard in the Championship up too, which for those that maybe just tend to watch the Premiership and nothing else, you see it when it comes round to cup competitions and you go, oh, this team's a bit better than I remember them previously. So I think it raises the game in general. It doesn't come without maybe some negative aspects, Peter. You could say, does it mean that some teams will just pull away from other teams, and how do they keep up, and how do we make sure that other teams don't overspend to try and stay in the race, which is always a fear. But if you're a footballer, this is a great time to be a footballer in Northern Ireland.
100%, because the big problem, looking back on the transfers in particular, we go back to, at least for my generation, the Peter Thompsons. That seemed like, oh my goodness, a player, he's being taken on the great escalator to the Football League, and where will it lead? We don't know. But there would always be the talk of, oh, well, you have to get up to full-time football, getting the speed up again. That doesn't seem to be the case. Just the confidence now having those teams, but it will be interesting to see. If there's one team that would join them, is there any in the pack of course, we're talking about Linfield, Glentoran, Larne and Crusaders as the 2/3 team. Could we see any more joining them full-time, or is it we're set with what we've got for now?
I think we're set with what we've got for now, and you wonder whether Crusaders would naturally, being the closest to being full-time, be the next natural one then to follow. I'm not sure if it's something Cliftonville want to jump into yet. Some of those players will feel full-time with the amount of training that they do. I mean, that's one of the big changes compared to previous years, the amount of work that goes in during the week. Not to say that in the past players didn't take it as seriously, but now I think the expectation on players to come in and put in extra nights or just do extra fitness themselves, that has increased the professionalism around the league. Even if the teams aren't full-time professional clubs, the players behave like professionals. Aspirationally, many of them are professionals, and that's why you see now, and I mean, my goodness, if you've been following the league for a long time, you're seeing boys 19, 20 years of age, big strapping lads built like Adonises who just practically live in the gym, eat, sleep, breathe football, and you go, a wee bit different than the lads maybe that I grew up playing football with, who maybe a bit less sturdy.
Michael, you were a tank back in the day. You're being too honest.
I was a butcher's pencil.
You were chiseled. Well, with that being said, let's get down to brass tacks ahead of the league kicking off this Friday. We have 12 teams to look at. Rules are simple in this league. Most amount of points after 38 games. You're the winner, least amount, and you are out. I have a hat to pick out teams, aka a big bowl from my kitchen, and that's just going to be the way I decide the order of things today. Just decided not to go for alphabetical or last year's league position, except I'm going to break my rules straight away for the first one, as we're going to start with last year's champions, Linfield, as there is the small matter of their recent European outings to chat to first. It's fair to say it's been a rather memorable campaign this summer for David Healy's side so far. There's been more than one wonder goal scored, and along the way they've trekked to Norway for Bodo Glimt. They went to almost Wales when they technically went to England for TNS, and they'll be taking in the sights of Zurich this week in Switzerland. They played the first leg last Thursday at Windsor Park, where they lost 2-0 against Swiss champions FC Zurich. And after all that, David Healy seemed disappointed after that.
Doesn't it show you how far our teams have come when we are disappointed, when we underperform in Europe? And I wasn't at the game to be able to say that Linfield didn't play well overall or did, but David Healy has high expectations. We've seen the win over Bodo Glimt and then what happened after it, so that should maybe temper hope versus reality at times. And when you come up against bigger teams from strong leagues, you have to understand that the Irish League is not a European powerhouse yet, but we should absolutely have the aspiration to be all the time increasing our coefficient ranking. We want more of our teams to go through. Supporters struggle with that because they don't want their rivals to do well, and people who were maybe quieter in the early part of the summer when Linfield were getting through rounds are seeing Linfield lose a couple of games and going, yo, that's more like it, because we don't like to see our rivals outperform us. But Linfield still have a very real chance of making the Europa Conference League group stage. I would suggest at 2-0 down, it's a pretty mammoth task to overturn that away from home. Who knows? 2 goals, take it to extra time, dig in for penalties, but I would suggest that's a tad romantic. So it might be that the Conference League is the route that they look at, and I don't think any Linfield fan will be disappointed when you look at who they potentially could be playing.
Not at all. It was very much a respectable result after that hammering they took against Bodo Glimt in Scandinavia when they conceded 8. I haven't seen such a dominating display since Norway's Winter Olympics. They do now look forward to either going, well, potentially progressing in the Europa League or dropping down into the Europa Conference League. I feel as though you nailed it very well when you discussed this, Michael. It is kind of like football snakes and ladders.
Oh, it really is. You feel like you need a degree in this sort of thing. UEFA don't make life easy for us. It was like when they introduced the Nations League, and you're like, oh, there's leagues A, B, C, and D, and you're like, oh, that seems easy. Yes, and then there's 4 leagues within A, and you're going, what? And then if this happens, and then if it's a Tuesday and you're standing on your right foot, so it gets a bit convoluted and quite quickly. Again, once you try and get your head around it here, Linfield know, win our game, we stay in the Europa League as long as we're able to overturn the 2-0 deficit, and then we can go on and play Hearts, or drop out and then take on either Latvian or Maltese opponents, which would be, at least on paper, an easier match, a more palatable match. But I really honestly would love to see what would happen in a Linfield against Hearts game. And people would say, well, your mad Hearts would win. Would they? Sligo, look at what they did to Motherwell. So why can't we start to believe that our teams can do it? And I do think that Linfield would believe, but we need to maybe as a league, back ourselves a bit more to be bigger and better, and no longer look at the summer matches as a chance to make a bit of money and then into the real stuff, the bread and butter of the league, and start to go, no, a chance to actually progress, make a substantial amount of money, increase your squad, and become a bigger and better club.
It could be massively game-changing for the league if Linfield was to progress and move towards where they want to go. So you alluded to it earlier on there. If they do beat FC Zurich, and like we said, it's kind of unlikely, it's a big task. They will play Hearts in a playoff round in the Europa League. Winner goes into the group stages. If they lose, they will face either RFS from Latvia, I'm sure it's a much longer name than that, or Hibernians from Malta, and that would be similarly in a playoff for the Europa Conference League. Winner goes into the group stage. Group stage in a European competition, an absolute pipe dream a few years ago. The Europa Conference League does open it up. It does change things, but it has to be the main thing on David Healy's mind. Looking back at last year, it shouldn't feel like the impossible dream. A Gibraltar team, Lincoln Red Imps, got there. Now they got duffed most games, but there's a bounty at the end of the rainbow if they get through to the group stage in the Europa Conference League. There is a base fee, almost €3 million. A victory in any of those games would be €500,000. A draw would net them €166,000. That's so much money, particularly compared to what they're getting domestically. You could really transform that team, but they've got to focus on it and they've got to make it happen. And they're going to be very busy over the next few weeks now. Midweek, they've got a game this week against Zurich, and then 2 more weeks after that during the week. But looking back at the campaign very quickly, 2 wonder goals that I mentioned. One, a thunderbolt from Mulgrew from far out that got them into extra time against TNS. And then there was also that incredible chip by Kirk Miller to seal the win against Bodo Glimt, again at Windsor Park. Do you have a favourite? Both of them were amazing.
Tricky, because Jamie Mulgrew wasn't meant to be playing. He was a late addition to the bench. They brought him on, and he just knew that time was against them. They needed a goal to force extra time, and he found it from long range, which is pretty special when your captain in the dying embers of the game comes off the bench and scores that goal. Limbs, as they would have it then, amazing scenes, and then to go again and score in extra time. Tremendous. But Kirk Miller is the more stylish goal, I'm afraid. Sorry, Jamie. So I think I'll go with Kirk. He did similar against Sejeska, was it 3 years ago? But I'm a sucker for that. Half the fans thought it was going to somehow drop wide, and then when it fell in and got them a win in a match that nobody gave them a hope or a prayer in, pretty memorable. And forget what happened next. That night, that goal, for me, just edges it in this campaign. But we're talking about Linfield going far in Europe. the most special goal of my lifetime, I think, from an Irish League team in Europe that I can at least recall was Shane Lavery for Linfield against Qarabag at Windsor Park, running half the pitch, destroying their defenders, and then it looked like running out of steam and someone catching up. He chopped past him and
Yeah.
blasted it across the goalie. So I know you didn't ask me that question, but that's still the one to beat for amazing Irish League goals in Europe from me. But Kirk Miller from this campaign.
Wow, what you just reminded me of that. 3 incredible memories in Europe for Linfield, really building up a reputation and a tradition of Europe. This is where it's built. For me, 2 goals, incredible. Kirk Miller, Healy-esque, breaks through, albeit from a defensive mistake, right of the box, on-rushing defender. He looks up and he just chips a wonderful goal. Although I have to give it to Mulgrew. It's the 94th minute. He's looking up. We've seen players in a game like that. The time is running out and they've looked up and you've begged for them to shoot or do something with it, and it's closer to the corner flag than it is the goal. The composure to give it a go, and what that goal then meant, I have to give it to that one. But that's all Europe. That's all fancy business. We're getting back down to the meat and potato of the league. So looking ahead to the league for Linfield, they're champions. They've done 4 in a row. They won it by a point. They're the favourites going into this year. Is number 5 on? It'd be the first time Linfield win 5 in a row since the early to mid 80s, where they won 6 in a row. That would be an incredible achievement for David Healy. Is that a big enough carrot at the end of the stick for this team?
And this is, remember, the worst Linfield team ever, a manager that's not very good, and tongue firmly in cheek, dear listener. But these are all the things that they have thrown at them, and yet in what we're also calling the best Irish League season of all time, the most competitive league, we're building up, and the hyperbole behind the league is there, and then we're saying this to Linfield. Can they win it again? Yeah, they're the team to beat, and they also have a pretty good start to the season, Peter, when you look at the fixtures.
Oh, they do.
If you just pick off the first 3, which are all on a Sunday, so it's pretty interesting, but this is all going to help their European voyage, I guess. They've strengthened pretty well. Joe Cooper is a quality player, needs no introduction to the league or to Linfield. Robbie McDade, Chris McKee, Vertainen, they got the firepower. Finlayson's meant to add something to their defence. I understand that they're not necessarily finished business. They've their eye on 1 or 2 others. Whether that goes ahead or not, we'll wait and see. But I asked their assistant manager at the league launch, was that business done? And he said, not necessarily, Michael. We'll see. Never say never. So we'll keep an eye on that. But it's the old adage, and I know it's a boring one. If you finish above Linfield, you'll probably win the league.
Of course, they could have some extra games they need to play if things go well over the next few weeks. But they bring in similar but ultimately new faces in Vertainen and Joel Cooper. They come back in, and looking back at last season, they only won it by a point. But the key thing I look at that table is the amount of draws. 11 draws. That's almost, it's over a quarter of the league. A lot of them, if you fix them, you're powering on. They only lost 3 times all season. They only conceded 24 goals all year in the league. If I had any big concerns about that team, it's about a presence that could just change the game, a player who could just take it by the scruff of the neck and make it happen. A Paul Heatley player, a Jay Donnelly, who's going to, when you're playing bad, he's going to come in and do it. Ethan Devine was that man last year, coming up and scoring the big goals.
They're trying to find someone to take on the Andy Waterworth mantle.
Big time.
And let's be honest, Andy's one of the greatest Irish League forwards of his generation. So, them's big shoes to fill. Robbie McDade has that opportunity. He's made the controversial move across the city to the big 2 rivals. Will he hit the ground running domestically? This is the chance that he's been waiting for, to be an out-and-out striker rather than sort of playing to the side of somebody else. And I would imagine, feel he has a bit of a point to prove. There'll be pressure on him too. Will he be able to do that? Manzinga's away. Manzinga contributed a lot of goals, and Manzinga's not a real striker, if you understand me. He is that sort of left forward. He cuts in and he can certainly create, and he does score goals. Did in this league and now away to Zalaregasheg. But I think when you look at it, they've got the options there, don't they? Jordan Stewart, Linfield fans want him to get more minutes. Joe Cooper, dynamism and pace. He's going to get at defences, and the strikers, whichever combination they choose to go with, Chris McKee, worth a mention there as well. They have options as to, well, if one isn't working, they can swap them out. I don't think the problem with Linfield this season will be their goals, but the draws is an issue. There's no doubt about that. They need to be more ruthless.
Yeah, I think there's one person that thinks that Jordan Stewart should be having more minutes. It's definitely Jordan Stewart. That's what he was calling for at the end of last season, and there's definitely competition for places, and it's 12 goals that Manzinga had during a rocky campaign. They'll have to be replaced somewhere, and I saw Linfield struggle against Warren Point across 2 games last year. They just couldn't break them down. One was a draw, almost potentially a famous last-minute win for Warren Point. The other, it was a famous last-minute win for Linfield, Eaton Devine. They drew against Portadown. They'll want to be smashing those teams. They did beat Warren Point 6-0 last year. They'll want to be smashing those teams, but it'll be who will step up and get those goals. I want to rank every team of what their aim for the season is, what would be a bad season, and what would be an unbelievably great season. Clearly, aim for Linfield, it's win the league. What would be a great way? They win the league early doors. They can sit back and concentrate on other things. They win it, and they have a great squad that develops pretty. I think a bad season is anything but winning the league. Second place, I think, is a bad season and a disaster for this team. That's a lot of pressure, but I think they know that. And hearing the likes of Chris Shields last year, they know and they relish the fact that they're out in front, they're the pace setters, and they've got to make it happen.
There's pressure on the entire top half. Coleraine have strengthened massively. So are they going to show a return on that investment? Are they going to perform better? That means they need to at least get ahead of Larne and Crusaders. Larne, the scrutiny is there on them. Is 5th anywhere near good enough for what they've been trying to achieve? And we saw how well they performed in Europe last year, and yet again in the league they couldn't kick on and and improve on what they were trying to do. Crusaders had a strange season and felt like they were out of it for ages, and yet finished 4th. Won the Irish Cup, and it all ended up feeling not as bad as it could have done, despite a lot of scrutiny and a lot of people being quite down on them, and they probably deserved it at one part of the season. So you look at it and you go, these teams all need to improve. None of them can afford to really be 5th or 6th. They don't want that. Glentoran finishing 3rd. Well, they were top of the league with not very long to go, and Cliftonville have one of the best seasons that they've ever had that doesn't end in them winning the league. That's why it's so competitive. Who's the pressure on most? Probably Linfield, because they're the defending champions and they're the team that everyone says should win it. They're the team that if they were to win the Irish Cup, the League Cup, but not the league, fans would still be calling for the manager's head. That doesn't happen elsewhere. You look at the additions elsewhere and you feel like it's going to be harder for Linfield to win the league than it was last year. You don't end up with a team that by March is already home in a boat. You want it to go all the way to the last day in May.
So there's the team everyone's chasing after. So let's get into the 11 other teams that are hoping in one way or the other that they can bring the Gibson home back to their home patch. I dive into my hat, aka my bowl from a kitchen, and the next place we're going to is one of the showgrounds, Coleraine.
I must say I'm enjoying this actually. I feel like the FA Cup is happening in front of me.
You just wait until I pull out exactly the same team twice. But yeah, Oran Kearney, has he had a change of heart, Michael? Small squads, they're so last season. Big beefy squads, are they now in? This is a team that really needed to reset after last season. They lost 4 out of their 5 post-split games, and they were far out 6th in the league, and they really only scraped through to get 6th. They lost 8 out of their final 10 games, including once to Portadown. Out of the 19 games they have played this calendar year, and they only won 6 of them. 2 of them were against Warren Point. They only beat 2 of the top 6 sides in this year. Glentoran, once against Glentoran, once against Linfield. What has happened to this team? They're not up there where they'd want to be. Could this be the season where they right those wrongs and get the backup that they needed.
Last season showed that something needed to change, and maybe some of the things that had worked in the past weren't going to necessarily work as well anymore. And it gets to that point for any team. You can put a lot of trust in players. 1 year, something just doesn't click anymore. The thing was that for Coleraine, it wasn't a necessarily bad season up until they played that game, which ended in controversy against Linfield with the really good Stephen Fallon goal and the did it not touch the referee, and please don't bother tweeting me about it, I'm bored of your opinions. Sorry, I was on commentary that day, and there was about 2 months afterwards of people telling me what they thought about it. You can go back and hear what I thought, and I'm not changing my mind. But that seemed to impact them, and it was almost as if it compounded. That's it, nothing goes our way. And it sounds a bit critical, and maybe it's not fair, but the best way I could describe it was to say that it was as if a few people were feeling a bit sorry for themselves, and it just didn't feel as cohesive. And it was probably the first time that I felt like Oran Kearney didn't have all the answers. And that isn't a criticism. I think he was just looking out there and going, I'm picking good players. The normal routine ain't working. And look, they've backed him. It's clear that the powers that be at the bandsiders have not apportioned blame to the manager. They have said, that's fine, let's move on some players, let's bring some players in. And, well, boy, have they.
He's had rougher patches before, and they have benefited from sticking with him. So they've been here before. But perhaps, as you were referencing there, that may just be the breaks. However, 4 wins out of a possible 20 against the other top 6 sides, that isn't great. And I think they know they want to change it up. They've brought in a lot of bodies. There's competition for places in that side, probably more than ever before. Some of the recent names that have come in, the likes of Michael McCrudden, a player I've always thought has done well before, but just didn't happen for him at Cliftonville. Clearly, Oran's been looking at him for a while. Dean Jarvis has come in, Lee Lynch from Larne. That's a good backup to add to a squad that weren't getting the results, but a lot of times the performances were there before the turn of the year.
Well, I'm looking at it and going, it's quite a shake-up to your backline. Dean Jarvis, I imagine, isn't making that move to sit on the bench. So is that your new first-choice left-back, Conor McDermott? Is he meant to be second fiddle to Lyndon Kane? Or might I suggest we could see Lyndon Kane deployed in a position he played when he was a teenager, which is in midfield? There's a lot of competition. I'll not be as unkind as to try and guess who might drop out, but I do think Lyndon Kane is going to be a centre midfielder, at least early in the season, and they're going to try and see how that works. I think he's capable of it, but we'll see how it pans out. And with Michael McCrudden, you imagine after a year out of football, he was at Cliftonville, but he wasn't playing. If they have him up to speed, if they've been able to kind of get a bit of the love for the game back in him, and if he's raring to go, he'll definitely get you goals. So add that to Shevlin that they already have, and there's some. Again, we're going in early with these, but there's some good signs there. Will it be enough to win them the league? You have to say, at the moment, it looks unlikely, but go prove us wrong.
Shevlin was a revelation last year. Can they get Andy Mitchell back firing again? People have tried. We'll always look back to that incredible Dungannon season. He's a big player, makes a nuisance of himself up top. If he starts scoring, I'm sure they'll be buzzing about it. How much will they miss Patrick Kelly? I know he was young, but he was influential on that team. That's a bit of a hole.
It is. I think they'll be okay. Patrick's a really, really talented boy. It was no surprise to me to see him go across the water. He still has a lot of kind of growing in his game to do, and it might not hurt them to have somebody with more Irish League smarts in there in terms of not judging them on what their ceiling is, but in terms of where they are now. Patrick can go on and do very well, so I don't think it'll hurt them too much that he's gone, but they'll clearly miss him because he's a player that I rate really highly.
This team has done this before. They've lost many big names over the years. Lyons, Dooley, Darren McCauley, and now big characters in that squad, Alan and Bradley going. So it's a year of change, but not revolution. Michael, what's their aim going into this season? Is it as far up the top of the league they can possibly go, Or did they have a little bit in the back of their head thinking, we could sneak this title if the cards fall right?
I don't think Oran Kearney would ever say, fourth will do, lads. I don't think he would. So they'll go, the aim's to win it, and let's see where we end up. You have to aim as high as you possibly can. Realistically, looking at it, I think the top three is hard to get into. If you went back in time not that long ago, would you have had Cliftonville in that conversation?
Yeah.
So that shows you how quickly things can change. I've learned to never write off talented people and talented teams. So Korean's realistic target is to try and crack the top three. It's a difficult one, but that's the job.
I think if you look back at this time next year and they got in the top three, I think that'd be a brilliant season for this team. Difficult season is probably slipping out of that top six, and they're not guaranteed to be in it, I think, this year. But if a bad season is being on the other end of that dotted line after the 33rd game.
Yeah, I don't think they'll miss top six. I really don't. I think that they'll be good enough. And maybe we'll be looking back on this and going, what does he know? But that's, I don't mind making a call on it. I think they will make the top six okay. And they should be also looking at cup competitions and saying, can we get our hands on one of these? And I'm not to be disparaging to the Northwest Cup, but I'm talking about the League Cup or the Irish Cup there.
We dive back into my bowl-shaped hat and we have Glenavon. 10 years, Michael, of Gary Hamilton as manager. We marked this summer, and I don't think you'll find many a Glenavon fan who would argue that on the whole, it hasn't been a roaring success. He took a team who would regularly finish near the bottom of the league, bit all over the place at times before he was there, and he's turned them into a real team, built on youth, mostly homegrown, and the fact that he got them to finish third 4 times since 2014-2015, an incredible achievement. But despite those amazing campaigns, he's never come in with a sniff of winning the league. It's been since 18-19 was the last time they finished in the top 6. Can you see them breaking that streak and returning back into the top echelons?
Difficult. Gary, the man, the beard, the legend, first of all, I have a lot of respect for him. He's a really good manager. The players love him. He had a wonderful squad of kids that he just wanted to do well in football and progress. And, you know, I wonder if you look back and you think, gosh, they could have held out for more money here, could have done this there, but they just wanted to make sure that the boys, you know, had the opportunities that they had. The top 6 is tricky. I think, and I know we'll come on to them whenever your magic bowl of wonder, trademark pending, draws out Ballymena, but the battle is first and foremost for me Glenavon, Ballymena, and then seeing where they end up afterwards, because there was a point between them last season, and I think, you know, 7th and 8th is where those two clubs potentially could fight it out. I don't think Glenavon will make top 6 if I'm pushed for it, but it's not that I don't think they'll not be a bit better than last season. I just don't know that they can be top 6 this year.
They really rolled the dice last year. They brought in Andy Waterworth, Mark Stafford, Mark Hockey. Ultimately, it didn't really bear fruit. Mark Hockey's the only one left. You know, sadly, Andy Waterworth's retired. But they gave it a go. Clearly, they thought they had something and they needed that just to tip them over the edge. That's just how it falls. They've brought Owen Bradley back in. Clearly, a bit of experience up top is what Gary wanted. And looking at this squad, at least for my eyes, I cannot stop raving about Peter Campbell, Danny Wallace. Those two would fit into almost any team in this league. They're some of the best players in their position in the league. And around them, it's how it all comes together. They had some bad breaks, bad red cards for Robbie Garrett in important times. We've all seen a scowling Gary Hamilton after just not coming together. So, looking ahead to this season, they've got the players to do it. Matthew Fitzpatrick, 13 goals, brilliant. And he's there again, looking to get at it. Bit of experience, a bit of luck, and Gary bringing back that spirit.
I'm looking forward to seeing Jack Malone, actually. You know, if you were to press me, I think Jack Malone from Derry City could be someone that will excite fans. He's a tidy footballer. we'll see how he does in the Irish League. But I think Jack Malone is a good bit of business amongst all the players that they brought in. Look, Glenavon on their day are a really formidable team. Anybody that I'm talking about finishing 7th and 8th isn't because they're rubbish. It's just simply because the quality in the league is that good now. A few years ago, it would have been an insult to be looked at as not making the top half, but I think now we just realise that there's 8 teams fighting for 6 places.
I think if we're looking at aims for this season, it's to get into the top 6 to guarantee your participation in this playoff system for European spot. That's the aim. That's the thing that could change and push on this club. A good season would be them in the top 6th. They'll take 7th probably, but they'd want to push on. A poor season is that they just fall down and 6-8 games to go and they're not even have a chance. I think that'll be a disappointing campaign. Could be interesting because there's experienced players who are going to be motivated. Gary gets his teams motivated, and there's young players in there who could just spark. There's always, every season, there's a player that pops up out of nowhere at Glenavon and is just one of the next big players in the league. And I think they could do with one of them right now. So a unique season ahead of them. Back into the bowl, and we're going to Larne. Mid-table aficionados Larne, the little harbour rats who could. You know, Michael, in Irish League grounds around the country, there'll be some prehistoric Irish League fans, probably born in, 1987 or something, and they'll be talking to some whippersnapper with a drum and a Stone Island jacket, and they'll say to them, I remember when Larne barely played in the top division, and Inver Park was one of the least appealing grounds in the country. And that young child will look up from their phone playing TikTok, stare at that person as if they were trying to explain how the telephone worked or how they used to own movies on discs and tape. And you may as well be talking about the Jurassic Age to those young fans, because for them, in the year 2022, Larne is progressive, forward-thinking, and they are a dyed-in-the-wool Premier League side. They are no more likely to be relegated as Hulk Hogan is to binning his bandana collection. It's just not going to happen. They're full-time. It's year 4 of this Premiership project. They're well established. They know the league. They've splashed the cash on bonus. Is it time for them to arrive at the absolute top table?
They need to.
Is this what this season needs to be? They
need to. There's a lot of pressure on Larne, and fans, some have already, I think, grown a little restless. I've seen it and I've heard it. When I've been interviewing people, I've heard what fans have said. Fans have come up to me and told me that they're not happy, and I'm sure some within Larne wouldn't be happy at me maybe sharing that. But look, nobody's stupid. Kenny Bruce isn't stupid. Tiernan Lynch isn't stupid. The players aren't stupid. They have to be doing better, and that's the reality of it. If you're a club that says, we want to be one of the biggest, we want to be successful, we're going to put this money in, we're going to bring in marquee players, they need to do that. They've done a tremendous job, sincerely, of capturing a community spirit in the area from what they do with the youth teams up, and when you see those kids play there, it's amazing what you've seen Inver Park become. I remember playing a cup final underage football in Inver Park and just hating it because it was a slope and the pitch was horrible. And you look at what it is now, and you look at what they've done to the church end and how much nicer the ground is to come into, the professional setup, the caliber of coaches that they have working underneath the manager. They have Irish League managers helping underneath the manager. People who in their own right could be more than capable of taking over another club in the top flight. But for Larne, they can no longer talk about, we're back, we're in the top flight. They need to now be saying, we are winning things. Here's what we're winning. And I spoke to John Heron the other day, who's back in training, and he said their target's to win the league. He never shies away from it. And that's what they will say, and that's what they will need to get closer to doing. I think they can be forgiven if they don't win the league, but they cannot be as far off it this season. And I guess that shows you how good I think Larne can be when I'm speaking like that about where they finished.
Well, there's the answer to our question, what their aim is. It's to win the league, and I'm sure many outsiders will think, well, of course, when you're spending six figures on a striker, that has to be the aim. You're not here to take part, and they'll be disappointed by that European run, particularly after how well it went last season. And they've changed the squad significantly enough. Out goes real cornerstones of this team, and the likes of Ronan Hale and Dean Jarvis and Lee Lynch and Davy McDade, who had been there since the championship days. And in come the likes of Paul O'Neill, Leroy Miller, Daniel Kearns. So they're quality auditions, but will it gel to make a team that can start to steamroll the teams around them?
I'm not convinced that they have added enough quality. And maybe they will be able to gel and prove me wrong. I think Leroy Miller has really impressed everybody in pre-season, and that's no surprise to me. When that was being rumoured as far back as January, and at least when I first heard people saying, "Oh, there's a chance," and we're looking at him and all this sort of thing, I thought he's going to go there and do really, really well. Paul O'Neill is a player coming in with a point to prove. He's moving into full-time football, which is good for him after not being full-time with Cliftonville and being on the periphery of the Cliftonville team. Aaron Donnelly is a player I've no doubt will be really good at Larne. I've a lot of good things to say about Aaron Donnelly, and it speaks to how much Levi Ives has performed that Aaron Donnelly wasn't getting a sniff for the Reds, because Aaron Donnelly is a really talented boy and probably deserved more. Did deserve more at Cliftonville, but look, those are the tough calls managers have to make. So you look through and you say, have they brought quality in? Yes, but is there just enough there? I just don't know, because sometimes the frustration watching Larne is they're playing lovely football, but the end product isn't quite there. And
yeah, of course.
Are we going to see more end product this season? I'm not sure, not yet.
Well, that's a really strong young duo up top in Bonus and O'Neill, and I guess now it's put up and make it happen. I think Dylan Lynch, manager, knows that there's pressure on now to make it happen, and I think an ideal season would be winning the league. I agree. It feels like it's just a wee bit early for them, and I think Kofi Balmer would be a big loss. Yeah,
well, and congratulations to Kofi on his pending move. Delighted for him. My thing about Larne is I'm talking about end product, but you know what? You see, when you think about it, they were one of the highest scoring teams in the league last season. I think only Glentoran and Linfield scored more than them, so it sounds like a strange thing to say. It's probably actually, when you crunch the numbers, their defence, they conceded 39 goals. That's 10 more than Cliftonville. It's 15 more than Linfield. And they're about to lose their star centre-back.
Yeah.
So how they spend that money, I would imagine that they will. I think they're going to get a guy in for Crystal Palace on loan. Sometimes their loan business hasn't worked out. You know, that's one thing. Is it the right move to do? But they're bringing in a boy that, if it happens, was at Bohemian. So maybe that will work out. But yeah, I'm not 100% sold on Larne yet. But we know what they need to do. They need to kick on, and fifth won't be good enough. I think fans will be asking for change if fifth is as good as it gets this year.
I think plateau means something needs to change. So I think they'll appreciate being the underdogs. Maybe they see themselves as the underdogs over in Larne, and similar to Linfield, lots of draws. 11 draws last year. It's just too many. And I know they can go either way, but a top 3 finish I think would be a brilliant season. Top 3, and that's a sign of intent. We are ready to go. I want to talk about what it takes to survive in this league and get down into the numbers, because ultimately, if you want to survive in the league, you got to finish 10th or 11th. So what does that take? Well, back 14 years ago, you needed 36 points. That got you to 11th. Dungannon finished bottom that year, but they didn't go down due to a technicality, and that became a trend for them. Things can change, but when we're talking about the amount of points teams need to get, I wanted to get into it. So the highest point total for an 11th place team came the season after. That was 39 points for Lisbon Distillery in 2009, 2010. And the highest 12th place points total came in 2015-16, 34 points. Looking through this, that is a massive outlier. Warren Point came last that season. They were level on points with Ballinamallard in 11th, but they missed out due to a -8 goal difference in comparison to Ballinamallard. In recent times, you seem to need less points to stay up. probably around 34. 35 would have got you 9th, 10th. Last season, bottom place Warren Point only had 12 points going into the split, and they got 3 wins out of the last 5. Technically, Portadown are the team with the lowest ever points total, 13 in 2016-17, but they would have got 25 because they got 12 points taken off them. Carrick was only above them on 22. But Lisburn Distillery have the real honour of only getting 19 points in 2012, 2013. In the current 12-team setup, that is the lowest. Unfortunately, we've never seen Lisburn Distillery in the top division again. In short, each manager whose aim it is just to survive, what should they be aiming for? Well, history says it's probably around 26. That's I think 26 points is your 40-point mark in the Premier League, where everyone says they're aiming for. So let's call it 8 wins and the odd draw. Every team like Carrick, Newry, Portadown, they'll think every win now is closer to safety. 9 wins may as well be cloud 9. That is the real Irish League nirvana. 9 wins. Carrick got 9 wins last season. They got 10th. 11 points away from that playoff place at 11th. Same for Warren Point the season before. In fact, in 14 seasons, Warren Point, like I said, in 15-16, is the only team to be relegated by normal means with 9 wins. So the season may be a marathon, but it's a sprint. It's a sprint to 9 wins and Irish League nirvana. It all starts this week, obviously, and this is why I want to forego my rules and pick out one of those teams who will be aiming to stay up, aiming to get 9 wins and almost guaranteeing safety for next season. Carrick Rangers. Michael, they shot out of the traps last year, all led by their impassioned new manager at the time, Stuart King. They built a team with experience. It was an up and down season for the Amber Army, but they never really looked like relegation fodder until that significant mid-season lull. From your point of view, what was behind that lull in mid-season?
They shot out of the traps like me, Peter. They started really fast and then quickly pulled a hammy. And you go, the boy can't do it anymore. It was weird watching it, wasn't it? Because people were getting all sorts of carried away. Carrick Rangers going, my goodness, he's Stuart King, king of the castle. Let's build the statue now. It was difficult, a mixture of injuries and illness and different things, and you start to realise how thin a squad is once you miss a few players. And then you kind of saw, I guess, everything settled down and where Carrick were going to be. Carrick Rangers are typically somewhat of a yo-yo club. I'm not upsetting anybody by describing them as that. Everybody knows my colours at the end of the day. Deep down, I always want to see my hometown team do well. And it got a little nervy towards the end, but they'd done the business early doors. If you're asking me, will they survive this season? I find it very hard to be fully objective because they're my team. I'm just so pessimistic every year, and I don't really have any reason to be. There's nothing that screams out as being awful. I think when you look at the players they brought in, there's goals in Curtis Allen, and they've got a competition for the number 1 jersey for the goalkeepers. Aaron Hogg has been a great servant, but Ross Glendinning's come in. Cameron Stewart, once they get him up to fitness, is going to, they hope, bolster the defence. Andy Mitchell and all his midfield wilds on loan from Larne. So you can look through and you can say, there's improvement there. Will it be enough? It might just be enough, but it's not going to be easy.
Well, that's why I joke about this race to 9, because in many ways that's what it was. It's when you're down in that bottom part of the league, you can get caught up and look at everybody. Everybody thought Carrick Rangers were out of it, and then they weren't. It's looking at how the season set up and just going through the calendar and going, if we can get to 9 wins, you should be set. Because in the end, they were set. But it just didn't look like it for a long time. And I can tell why Stuart King got so frustrated so many times. I remember when I was covering their 2-2 draw at Shamrock Park, Portadown were 2-0 up at half time. They were pushing on, but Carrick pulled that back to get it back to 2-2. That was a really vital game for them last season, and that was just that Jekyll and Hyde nature of the team. And I'm sure for just the mind of Stuart King. He will want it to not be as bumpy like that. And one thing I wanted to highlight was that Stuart King, I saw in the Belfast Telegraph, said that he signed a new deal last month. And this kind of shows his ambition. Ultimately, he says, I would love the club to go full time, but we will give it another shot in a very competitive, tough league. After a period of reflection, I've agreed to stay in charge and keep fighting for the club. Was there a chance he wasn't sticking around?
Stuart has a massive heart, and I think he can be very hard on himself. And he probably, when the club was going through a sticky patch, took a lot of the blame for that, or at least placed it on himself. And as a manager, football can be lonely, and football can be not very nice when things aren't going well. And I imagine the bottom couple of places in the Premiership are really hard going, and because of the sort of difference between the leagues, Carrick tended to find, and they're not the only ones, Newry City have proven it too, you have that season where nothing's happening, it's all horrible, it can't end soon enough, you get relegated, then the next year it's like, hey, isn't football class, we win most weeks and everyone's lovely. I don't think Stuart was going to leave. I was pretty confident that he was staying, but I know that he's been away a little bit this summer. He's been in Las Vegas, he was telling me. He's had a couple of different trips to Spain. I think that's probably done him the world of good. And he'll be back misbehaving on the touchline soon. Because he says he's going to calm down, but he just wears his heart on his sleeve. And I think sometimes that's to his own detriment in terms of he can be a bit too animated. And other times he probably beats himself up until they play their next game. And he's not the only person. I'm sure anyone, even amateur league footballers, managers listening to this are going, yep, I'd probably be the same. So, that's just the nature of it.
He's a man with ambition. Clearly, that's great for a team like Carrick because you want your manager to be aiming to shoot up as much as possible. You want your success to be his success. And aim-wise has to be to stay up, build, and hoping you've got something to push on. Clearly, a bad season is 12th and straight relegation. I think a great season would be last season without the slump, if I'm being honest. If they could do that without that slump and they're never closer than 7 points from 11th, well, what a brilliant season that would be for the Amber Army. Can they do it? I think they can, compared to the people around them. They potentially are the most likely team to be caught up. I don't think they're the weakest team in the league, but I think they could be caught. They could fill a slot like the Portadown Warren Point thing. I think it could be one of those teams. I think they can push on because I think Jordan Gibson's a big miss. I think he was a big player up top, even as a physical size. He would change some games for you. But can't Curtis Allen do it? Is Cushley going to be the same player making the difference again? And how does Jim Irvin fare? Lots of questions, but I feel with quality players like Ben Tilney, you'll get enough goals to get through.
I hope so.
Next up, one of our Euro champions or Euro heroes this summer, or Euro stars, Crusaders, and like any great band coming off a triumphant tour, is that the recent bumps in the road, well, they're starting to become... Is it starting to look like a decline? To keep this music metaphor going, have the recently poor received albums become the norm? Are the glory days of their appetite for destruction, their mid-2010s double? Is that now in the past? Should Crusaders now get used to more of a Chinese democracy than going for top of the charts? Are they a mid-table club, Michael, now? Or are they going to bounce back? Because they haven't been up at the top for a couple of seasons now. I think they've lost a big player in Aidan Wilson. And I think 1 to 11, you've got a team that could beat anybody in the league and could go on a fantastic run. But as we've seen in previous years, sometimes they're just that 5% off.
It's interesting that they haven't brought more players in, which you maybe would have expected them to do when you see that quite a few players have left the club. Maybe they're going to have a late burst in the window and bring a few names in at the last minute, but that's the one thing that I think if you're a Crusaders fan, you would worry about it. Not necessarily the quality of the players that are there, but is there enough strength in depth with the team that they have if they have a couple of players that are injured and a couple of the stalwarts, like Declan Cadell's no longer playing, he's retired. Paul Heatley's another year older. Just little things, so is Jordan Owens, things like this where you go, okay, well, some of the experienced heroes might not be able to start as many games or finish as many games. That's already happening with Owens. So maybe, step forward a new hero type thing, but I haven't seen the
Big time.
business. I haven't seen the business that would fill me full of confidence. To be fair to Dean Abbey, I think he was kind of lone striker almost in the wilderness in the European matches, going like, hello, anyone want to come up here and stand near me? I don't think Billy Joe Burns is going to be playing up top, but he's scored enough goals from defence at the moment. Never write off Crusaders. They're a team that are always trying to be top of the pops, if you want to continue your music analogy.
Absolutely. And they've got some old favourites, like any team with Billy Joe Burns has got the spirit to push on and make something happen. Paul Heatley, we talked earlier about Linfield having that spark, that talent. You could just turn a game. He's a, it's not the glory days for him, but he's a player that could still do it. He's still starting for this team. Ben Kennedy's one of the best players in the league. He's a magician in the middle there. Laurie's a massive presence. You look to the bench. Is this now time for the likes of McMurray to step up and Adam Leckie to step up and fulfill the promise? Because they were brought in as big replacements and they've never really filled the shoes of the players that they were brought in to replace. Is it more of a case of they need to come on and become the new players for them to return to the top three in this league?
I think Adam Leckie's done okay, to be honest with you, but he is a very different type of player to Jordan Owens, so it depends on what you're looking for. Adam Leckie, he's the perfect example of good feet for a big man, because people look at the height and they just assume that he's there for the knockdowns. He's a very technical player, so Adam's a good footballer. Johnny McMurray is more in the mould of a Jordan Owens because he's a bit more physical. He's so competitive. He's got that kind of maverick about him. So it's what way do you want to play your football, really, and what way suits Crusaders and suits Stephen Baxter. If you're wanting to have that focal point who ultimately, get it long to him, he flicks it on, and somebody fast whips in behind, that maybe doesn't play to Adam Leckie's biggest strengths, which actually is get it to feet, hold it up, move it on. So they have to figure that out, and they've a new forward in the mix as well here. So yeah, I think we'll see Ben Kennedy's air guitar get plenty of renditions over the course of the season. He'll be strumming along nicely in his own personal goal tally and getting people points in their fantasy football. But for me, they're one or two signings away from properly challenging to win the title.
Well, a comeback tour could be on. If what they're aiming to do, surely the aim is sail Europe without shenanigans, secure it without having to go through the drama of the playoff. A great season would be doing just that. Top three would be great for them. I think a really bad season is that they drop out of the top six, and I think a bad run, I think that could easily happen. I think there's just so many people snapping at their heels. I think that's on the cards.
But they did lose 12 times last season in the league, and that's absolutely unforgivable if you're a team like Crusaders. So that can't happen again. They finished 15 points off Linfield in the end, if my mental arithmetic's right. So they were a long way behind them, and they've a few things to address. Let's see if they can do it.
So with the new season, we also have a new team or familiar group joining the league this season. Newry City are back, but how are they going to fare this year? A man who knows a thing or two about the club is Ally McKenzie. He is from the Shed End View podcast. And Ally, starting with last season, I did see Newry once or twice. Broadly, did the season go as planned? You did run out as winners, but it probably felt a bit closer than some was expecting.
It did. I made a very, very bold statement on, I think, our very first podcast of the year. So it was about this time last year. I said that Newry would walk the championship. and I got nothing but stick all season for that. But in the end, it was a wee bit tighter. We kind of limped to the title in those final 6 games. But I think it was comfortable, really. Looking at the season as a whole, it was comfortable. I think there was no doubt, really. I think it was 8 or 9 points clear by Christmas, and Ballyclare beat us, and there was a little bit of interest after that. But it went as we expected. I thought we'd win it, and we did.
Now, is that because you didn't expect the other teams to be as good as they eventually were? Did you just trip up in key places? What was the stumbling blocks to Newry walking it last year?
The season before that was kind of cancelled because of COVID. Newry, I think, finished, was it 5th or 6th, and just were a mile off, but had a very strong team on paper. We retained quite a few of those players, but lost some key players like Adam Foley. He was a big loss for us, but I just felt with the squad that Darren had assembled last season coming into it, I just felt like with Portadown out of the league, Lauren out of the league, kind of those big hitters, that we were the next big team. And it was our time to kind of go and win that title. We did slip up at several times. I think every time we got our noses out in front, it was pegged back a bit at the start. I remember Ards being that team that were kind of staying there with us. Then as the season went on, different teams came through. Dundela got stronger and gave us a few tough games, even though they stayed down the bottom of the table. And, it's the Championship, I still think, is the best league here in that you just don't know what to expect every week. And, we lived that this season, where some weeks it was pure despair, other weeks it was pure elation. And it was just a really interesting season, and one that you look back on thinking we did really well to win it.
Based on that, you're going into the top division again. Totally different challenge. What's the fan base thinking? Is it trepidation again, or are you feeling a bit more confident after the season that you've just had?
It is a rare kind of feeling in that you go up as champions, but with how the finances have kind of widened the margins between the top teams and the middle teams and the bottom teams now, you are going up there thinking it's going to be very, very difficult. By no means is anyone defeatist thinking that we're going to come straight down. I think we fancy ourselves when we go up there. Our experience from the Premiership 4 seasons ago, we did come straight down again, but we gave it a good go. I think there was plenty of games we only lost by 1 goal margins, and we do have a little bit more quality this time going up. So I think the general feeling is that if we can hang in there and kind of get to the split and be within a few points of teams, or in around there, I think that we'll be okay. We do have the experience. Looking at Carrick, Portadown, Dungannon, those are the teams that we are really going to be battling this season. It's it's free hits against Linfield and Glentoran. If you get anything out of those games, then very good. But looking at how the Point did last season, those are the important games. And the Point, I think, lost 3 against Portadown, and eventually that's what led to them being relegated. So we need to look at that this season and build on what they've done. And fingers crossed, just hang in there until the split.
That was the talk of last year, was these quote-unquote mini leagues. And I think as a fan base, you've already targeted who's likely to be in there. Because I'm sure for yourselves, it's about building yourself up, establishing yourself as a Premier League team again. And it's just survival, really, isn't it, this year?
It is. Survival is the main thing, I think, when you go up to this league. And then you have to look at re-establishing Newry as a Premiership team, because for years they were one of the names that was constantly in the league every season. Unfortunately, what happened 10 years ago, and the club went bust, and then we've come back. We've been back to the Premiership, back to the Championship, and now back to the Premiership. But I think it's time where if we can hang in this season and do what One Point have done in previous years of just getting up there and just getting by, I think that we can establish ourselves. And, if we hang in there and this time next year we're still in the Premiership, that's when you can start looking at, players maybe who might not be getting games for the bigger teams, and might drop down, and look at Newry as well. They're an established Premiership team. They're going to be there, and, it's worth going down and playing for them. And maybe that's where we can build from.
One thing that's interesting about your squad is I remember seeing a graphic last season, and it had the starting 11, and it pretty much had a little note beside it of how close to Newry they're from, or they're based. Like, this is a really local team. These are lads who are broadly from the area. Do you think that's been a part of how you guys have been able to build this squad and build this camaraderie amongst the whole team?
Definitely. I made that graphic a little bit tongue-in-cheek because You know, when Darren rebuilt the club in 2013, really reformed, it was just local players. It was boys playing in the local kind of Sunday league here. And from then, that has been the ethos. It's boys who want to play for the club. You know, Newry is the biggest club in the area. There's no doubt about that. And it's a privilege for these boys to play for that club. And that's the kind of ethos that's driven through, even when we were in the Premiership. The last time, I think the boy from furthest away was Kevin McCardle, who's from Dundalk. So it's just over the border. And that connection that we have, like people have said, and players that have come with us, like Mark Kelly, Fra Brennan, they've all said it is a proper family club. They've never felt love like it from the fans. And it's a small but very loyal fan base. And everyone's from the town. And when the players from the town are playing for us, it just feels like you have that extra level of connection. And that's definitely something that they've built on, that kind of fan rapport that everyone is bought into. And now when the players come in, they know that if they don't give 100%, you know, there's boys here from Newry who know what it means to wear the jersey, and having that pride on the pitch and like that representation, it means the world to us.
Looking at this squad, this team of players that you're hoping that will keep you guys up, outsiders of Newry, they'll look at the team and they'll see people that they recognise from the league, people like Stephen Moan, Darren King, Daniel Hughes, but there is a mix of experience as well as young talent that make up this team. Who are the players that really won you that championship last year? Who are the stars?
The names you've just mentioned there, Stephen Moan never gets the spotlight because he's not that kind of guy. But he was phenomenal last season. In fact, I put him down as my player of the season. He didn't win it, but he was phenomenal. And Darren King, obviously, Stephen Maguire at the back, John Boyle was brilliant. But it's the front three, like the young guys that we have, and they're all in their early 20s. Or I think two of them might still be 19, but John McGovern, James Teelan and Lorcan Ford, those three are so exciting. And to see the pace and the youth that we have mixed with the experience of Dingo, Daniel Hughes, just sitting right in front of them, you know, it is very exciting for Newry fans. And the fact that we've been able to hold on to John and James was a massive, massive thing for us, because at the end of last season, it was kind of like they were phenomenal. Someone's going to come in and take them away. And there was a lot of rumours throughout the summer. And I'm so glad that they're staying with Newry to get that Premiership experience that they need. Because realistically, you know, barring something going wrong for them, they're going to be playing every week. Where had they gone to the likes of, you know, Cliftonville, Glenavon, whatever it might be, if something goes wrong, they're not going to trust a 19-year-old to go on for them. So they're getting that experience with Newry. They're getting, you know, that first season of the Premiership, working it out, and then whatever happens can happen. But I feel like if Newry could stay up this season, then there's no reason for those boys to really move on. So those are the three that really excite me. I think that they could do a job with the experience that they get in the Premiership.
You've kept the core of this squad. You've only lost Fra Brennan and Mark Kelly, who, you know, were more experienced players. You brought in Andrew Martin from Banbridge Town, Donald Rocks on loan from Cliftonville, Ethan Souza from Dungannon Swift. So this is not a big overhaul, and you've made a new signing as well, just recently, adding to that front line. First game of the season, Carrick. That's already a massive game. Would you have rather had a less pressurised first game, or you're just excited to be back and start from the off?
I don't think there's no such thing as a less pressurised game in the Premiership. I think every game is going to have that weight. I think it's better that we have Carrick, because it's like, okay, that's a must-win game. And the pressure will be on to win that game, because I think in our next 4 matches following that, we have, I think it's Linfield, we have Glentoran, Glenavon and Cliftonville. So, I mean, welcome back to the Premiership. It's one of those things where you're looking at that thinking, wow, if we can get like 3 or 4 points out of those games, that's a pretty good return. So I don't think there's a better game than Carrick. Possibly Carrick, Portadown or Dungannon in that first game was what I was looking for. Because you're thinking, we need to get 3 points on the board. And those, you know, I'm not saying that those are teams you're going to get them against, but you've got a better chance. So it's kind of like, it's all or nothing. And the good thing is, the last time we were promoted to the Premiership, we played Carrick in a playoff and we beat them. So it's nice going back down to Taylor Avenue or whatever it's called now, but back down there and actually playing against them. And fingers crossed we can come away with a similar result to May 2017 or 2018.
Amazing. Well, wrapping it up, we're looking for every team. What's kind of best case scenario, worst case, and what's the aim? Well, we know what the aim is. The aim is stay up. That's the goal for this season. We all know what worst case scenario is. It's getting relegated. Best case, it's whatever. Stay up by all means. But if I was to offer you right now 11th place and a playoff, would you take it, or do you want to give it a go?
I would take it right now. I would bite your hand off for it, but not if it's against Warren Point, because if they beat us to relegate us and they got promoted, I don't think I could live with myself. So, yeah, I would take that now. You know, that's the ideal scenario, isn't it? And hopefully, if we're in the playoff, we could stay up and Warren Point can just get promoted. That way, I'm happy enough.
It would be fantastic to see the Mourne ultimatum in the Premier League. And it's funny because there's that whole joke going around that both those teams seem to swap players, you know. There's a whole different team and they're just wearing a different kit in the same area, but that hasn't happened this year. So it feels like those teams are having their identities more. They're having that strong base, and I feel like you're destined to meet in some sort of cup this year. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Guaranteed. It'll be like the Mid-Ulster Cup. We always get the point. But the thing is, like, they have no players really from the local area, so they struggle, I think, fan base wise. They don't have that connection that we have. So, you know, when they say it's a local derby, it isn't really for us. It's us against Athlone Town.
You know what? I've been going through this whole thing. I've been ticking off what I would describe as sly little digs, and just as we get towards the end, they're not sly anymore. They're full on. There's a rivalry brewing there, and you know what? It's fantastic to see. Ally, thank you so much for chatting to me. There's loads of interviews with people from Newry right now. They can listen to it via your podcast channel. How can they find that?
Yeah, so if they go onto YouTube to the Shed End View podcast, we basically try to podcast every other week because we've got full-time jobs and are very busy, but we just try to do roundups of games like every 3 or 4 games. So yeah, if you go onto YouTube, you'll find kind of our back catalogue, interviews with players, managers, and just reviews.
And it would be remiss of me not to point out it has come and gone, but you were one of the fine people that was behind the kickoff, the very first football film festival. How did that go?
It went amazingly well. And, you know, Peter McParland is a Northern Ireland football legend, and he's also from Newry. So to have him come back to Newry for that was it was a real pinch yourself moment. One of the highlights of my career to date, honestly. The man scored 5 goals at a World Cup, and we kind of reunited him with a fan. He didn't know about this. There was a fan who was 92 who turned up to the screening and who had travelled to Sweden on a Vespa just to see Northern Ireland play. There was only 5 fans travelling. He was one of them. So Peter and this 92-year-old man, Billy Hunter, his name was, were reunited for the festival. So honestly, it just went as well as you could ever imagine.
Ally, I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you so much. And hopefully I will get you on to talk about what is a seamless and not bumpy ride all year. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks very much, mate.
That was Ally McKenzie from the Shed End View podcast. He was feeling confident that they could do something, but I think, like most people, he has Newry fighting it out amongst the teams at the bottom of the division. Very quickly, Michael, how do you see Newry going? Is it a hit and hope and cling on to the league in any shape or form?
Yeah. It has to be. Like when you come up, you're up against it. You're immediately presumed to be, and most likely are, the weakest team in the top flight. They've had that experience. Darren Mullen, who is a really talented manager, someone I have an awful lot of time for, he says that he feels they are stronger this time around, that they're not going to maybe make some of the same mistakes. He's brought in, I think Donald Rocks is an interesting one. I'd like to have a look more at him. That he's come in on loan from Cliftonville, and you can't tell anything after the first game of the season, but isn't everybody going to try and take some idea as to how the campaign will go after they go to Carrick Rangers on the first weekend? Because that's when you say, okay, this is what they're about. You know, we're a few days away from watching that game now and going, right, who is the team of these two that looks more like a Premiership team? And this is okay. You know, you can lose that game and bounce back. Of course you can, because you've 37 more matches to do it. But people are going to draw lots of inferences from the first few games. Newry City very kindly actually had me along to their promotion party, and I was the master of ceremonies there. And I can tell you, they absolutely enjoyed their promotion.
I can imagine. I think they're going in, and I said this to Ali, that they have firepower up front. I worry about them at the back. And I think that's why they didn't walk that championship. They were caught out a wee bit too much at the back. And I think it will just be about how many goals they can score against the other teams. But like last year, can they beat the other teams around them? I think they can. Best case, I could see them doing a Baldemallard and scaring people near 7th and 8th. Worst case is that they're out of it. But I have a good feeling about Newry. If I was a Newry fan, I think they'll enjoy their run no matter what. Michael, I'm going to put a little pin in it there for now. We will continue on our chat in another pod. But for those that have listened to you and enjoy the things that you're saying and the thoughts that you are thinking, where can they find you online?
You can find me at Clarke Show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you've been listening to this, drop me a wee message and let me know what you think. And feel free to disagree with me. That's the joy of it all, isn't it?
And of course, if you're just desperate for more Irish League content, Michael is the voice of a show that is an absolute must listen for Irish League content. He's got interviews with loads of people at the launch of the league. Part 1 is up now. Go check it out. It's at the Score NI.
It is indeed. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Just look for the Score NI. And the first part is out. 6 clubs represented, and you can guess how many are represented in part 2, which is out on Friday.
Hey, where did I get the idea of splitting up this malarkey? Michael, I appreciate it, and I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And there we have it for episode 1. Don't worry if your team wasn't covered. I've got a second episode coming this week. Hey, 2 for 1 in the first week. Not that bad. I really do appreciate you listening. This has been a while coming for me, and I've had a great time, even 1 episode in. So if you have found me through social media, amazing. If you would like to follow me, that would be even better. You can find a page for this program on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. It's all at Kicking Match. Aren't I good? Get a kicking match across the social media. I also would really love to have an email from you. If you are a fan or you just got a general interest in the Irish League or just want to say hello, please do get in touch with me. kickingmatch@gmail.com. If you want to be just like our Newry fan, Ally McKenzie, drop me an email. I just want to chat to other fans. It's what I want to do in this podcast, and hopefully you'll follow me over the next while. Hopefully you'll jump in for part 2 of this season preview. If not, all going well, please jump on where you find this podcast on Tuesday morning, where I aim to have a review of what is looking to be a very exciting game week 1. Thank you so very much. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Have a good one, and let's catch up soon.